Hi, I'm Andy Busch, economist, former chief market intelligence officer for the US government, and keynote speaker. And today, we're going to try to solve a puzzle. And I'm not talking about the one behind me. I'm talking about the puzzle of when the US will end the shutdown of the US economy. Now, it's almost impossible to see beyond the horror of refrigerated trucks in New York City full of recently passed coronavirus victims and really the devastating losses to those families. It's really hard to see that, and my heart goes out to those people and my prayers. But also, it's almost impossible to ignore the crushing blow of an economic shutdown on lower income and middle income workers in a wide range of industries. The economic repercussions of the coronavirus could even culminate in job losses not really seen since the 1930s. So it's pretty scary stuff. Now, the most likely outcome for the reopening of the US economy is before the hoped 10 to 12 week suggested shutdown that a lot of the medical officials have put forward to the president. I expect President Trump to announce a target date of May 1st. Now, that's a lot sooner than most people realize or probably think is safe, but let me walk you through this because I think this can come in the form of rolling reopenings with manufacturing, construction, and financial services really as good candidates for returning to work in the initial phase. And really, financial services are already operating remotely, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. But manufacturing and construction employ more people in the United States at about 20 million than leisure and hospitality at 16 million. And their share of economic output is 23%. It's even greater than their share, and it's even greater than the share of leisure and hospitality at 12.4% of the economy. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to try to walk you through why I think this is going to happen sooner on May 1st. And it's primarily because how devastating this impact is on the economy. And don't get me wrong, it's devastating the losses that we're seeing, and it's very scary when it comes to human beings. But it's very problematic from an economic standpoint, and that will in turn have serious ramifications for a lot of people's lives as well. Not like the virus, don't get me wrong, I'm not a cold-hearted economist or anything like that, but I am looking at this and I'm trying to be practical about how this is going to be approached, because we can't have a collapse of the economy, because that will lead to a collapse of society. And if that happens, we're going to be in much worse shape with the virus still running around. So we need to do these things. We got to balance these things. So what I'm going to talk about is 5 kind of interesting indicators for the economy and what people look at in the markets to get them really an understanding of what's happening. And then I'm going to walk you through what I think is going to happen on a 30 to 60, 90-day basis. And it's important to remember that governments around the world are not trying to currently eradicate the virus. That's not what they're focusing on. Rather, what they're attempting to do is delay the full exposure of the population to the virus while sufficient healthcare capacity can be attained to address the peak of the infection. Now, this should result in the smoothing of the infection curve, right? Instead of having that big peak, we're looking at having something smaller of a peak and then just kind of having bouncing along, but it's going to be elongating the time frame from peak to trough. Now, the strategy affords time for herd immunity to form, right? We hope that that can happen, and I think it will, as the population survives and becomes resistant to the virus. Now, that's really, really important. In addition, it stops healthcare systems from rapidly being overwhelmed, and it spreads the healthcare load over a longer time frame. That's what the current strategy does. So we're going to focus on a 3 to 6 month, or I'm sorry, just a 3-month time frame. And I want you to just remember this, right? The key takeaways here is that optimal time frame for social distancing to smooth the infection curve is probably 10 to 12 weeks. And at least that's what all the research shows. But that's not what's going to happen when it comes to the economy, because that's not the optimal time frame of the economy. The optimal time frame for shutting down the economy is to have it end as soon as possible. And that's why we need to get it up and running. So keep that in mind. All right, so let me talk about these 3 indicators, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see really quickly and just kind of go through these things because they're pretty cool to see what they look like. And I think that's important for people to understand what not only in the market's looking at, but economists and kind of losers like me, right? This is what we spend our time on, sadly. This is Johns Hopkins, right? This is the Johns Hopkins data set that most people look at for the graphs. They're pretty disturbing. Right here, you can see it's about 1.3 million people that have this infection worldwide. 74,000 people have died. That's about an average of about 5.5%. Now, just to put that in perspective, the reason why we do that, we want to know the mortality rate of this disease. And basically, if you compare it to the seasonal flu, which a lot of times people start talking about, the seasonal flu is only 0.1% mortality rate. So in other words, if you have 30 million people infected, you only get 30,000 people that die. Think about those numbers. If you get 30 million people infected and you get a rate of 5.5%, let's say 33 million, because that's the average people. So at a rate of 5.5%, you're talking about 1.8 million people dying. That is a massive amount. So it doesn't surprise me that we went about and shut down the economy and engaged in social distancing. That's really important. The other thing about this page is this little graph down here, and let me just pop that open. First, let me go to the United States. And you can see how many people are infected and how many people have died. But it's this page that's interesting, because what we're interested in is seeing the cases increase on a daily basis. And what we're trying to see is if we are seeing a slowing of that rate. And the good news is that Governor Cuomo, New York Governor Cuomo, came out today and said that that was indeed the case. They think they're seeing a peak here. And we know that's happened in Italy, and we know that's happened in Spain. And that's really good news. And that's why the markets rallied 7% today. Everyone's very excited about the potential for this to be peaking. And that would be great news for reopening up the economy and obviously reducing the amount of deaths in the country. So that's great. All right, next indicator is we're going to go over to Fred, believe it or not. What a great name. It's St. Louis Federal Reserve, and they call themselves Fred. But this is initial jobless claims. And these things just ginormously increased, right? 6.6 million people asked for unemployment payments to their state governments, right? So what does that mean? Well, a 1.5% increase in the number, or I'm sorry, a 1.5 million increase in this number generally leads to a 1% increase in the unemployment rate. So if you take 6.6 million people and divide it by 1.5, you get about 4.4%. You get 4.4, and that is the percent you add on to the unemployment rate. So to show the increase that's coming, right? So if we have a 4.4% unemployment rate, you add another 4.4% on top of that, you're at 8.8% for next month. And that is going to be one of the fastest increases in unemployment in our history. So that's why we will look at initial jobless claims, and they come out every week on Wednesday. Along with that number, we also get continuing claims. Now, these are obviously people that are continuing to ask for unemployment insurance payments. Why we look at this is basically you're moving through a continuum. You're taking the initial claims and putting them on the continuing claims. The reason why we want to look at these is to see for a stabilization eventually in them, because that'll tell us the economy perhaps has stopped going down. And then once they start to reverse, once you get about a 20% to 25% reversal of the increase, then you're going to start to see, or it would indicate the economy is growing. So that would be really good. All right, just really quickly, 3 more things, and then I'll wrap this up. This is the New York Federal Reserve Liberty Street. If you've never gone to their website, it's kind of cool. But this is their weekly GDP economic index, right? And you can see what's happened here. It's collapsed. It's actually back to the level of 2008. And that's why I say this is just horrific when it comes to the economy. The U.S. economy is not built to be shut down like it has been. This is just... It really is going to cause all sorts of problems. So you can see this is a number that get released every week. We can keep an eye on this. Slower numbers that come out. This is from the Atlanta Fed, their GDP Now forecast. But again, it shows very similar, just a catastrophic drop in the economy. It's going to get worse. Same thing for going back to the New York Fed. This is their Nowcast report. And you can see that it's already falling. It's a little bit slower here. But again, these are some really interesting indicators that you can use to stay on top of this stuff. You don't always have to listen to me or other people on the news. You can just go to these websites yourself and decide for yourself. Okay, so with that in mind, let me just wrap this up by saying how I see this thing unfolding over the next 30 days, because I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I think there's some good things that are going to be happening in the throes of this really terrible outbreak. All right, so how this is going to play out. The peak of this thing should be now, right? It should be over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll see what happens. I mean, this is given kind of what Italy's experienced and what Spain has experienced already, and they've seen some peaks there. But over the next 30 days, there's likely to be significant improvement in the actual coronavirus tests, right? These test kits, as well as the ability to accurately count the number of infections. In addition, I think the time to result from the test will likely become significantly shorter. Now, this is really important. Let me tell you why. This is going to allow further containment of the virus. First of all, it's going to be given to all healthcare workers and patients. Obviously, a fast, accurate test is going to allow healthcare personnel to move quickly to see who's sick, who has the virus, and who will require hospitalization, as well as the need for PPE gear. It's also going to hopefully stop the spread or reduce the spread amongst healthcare workers. We want those people on the front lines to be as safe and healthy as possible. Okay, and then next, it's going to be given to all first responders for the same reasons that I just went through. So the police, fire, and of course, medics, and anybody going out, in an ambulance, right? That's super important. Next up, you're going to get essential workers to be given these tests. Grocery store workers, sanitation staff, pharmacists, all of those key people that are out there working, really helping with the virus, really helping keeping the economy going, keeping people fed. That's just critical. So they're going to get it. And then finally, they're going to open this up and test most of the U.S. population, right, for both infections and antibodies to determine the full extent of the infection, and as well as really who's immune to it. And that's going to be very important as well. So what is that going to require? Well, it's going to require a massive production of tests, along with a huge build out of the testing areas. So you can expect that over the next really 30 to 60 days as well. Beyond that, over that time frame, there's going to be significant increased production of PPE gear, of respirators, and really of quarantine bed space with hopefully, fingers crossed, okay, better federal, state, and federal and state integration, and really the movement of all this gear and services and equipment to the hotspots that need it. So keep an eye that is going to happen. While it sounds terrible now, and there's so much acrimony between the federal government and the state governments, they will work together. And I think there's some better times coming from that standpoint. Help is on the way. Now, over the same time frame, I also believe that there's several medications that are going to likely be approved by the CDC and the FDA to really reduce the severity of the disease and reduce the time frame over which the patients can recover. And finally, protocols are going to be enacted at both the federal and state levels for going back to work based on probably a combination of testing, groups at lower risk, and really strict business sanitation protocols. As I mentioned earlier, really a strong possibility of rolling reopening of the U.S. economy is likely to take place, with manufacturing, construction, and financial services really good candidates for returning to work in the initial phase, right? So that's great. Now, I will tell you, as far as the go on this, I think the federal government's going to go way sooner than the states. They're going to be the first movers to start to reduce these restrictions, followed quickly by the states that are less affected, or even the states that have just not fully implemented it. States with larger outbreaks, they're going to be slower, right? The larger economies, they're going to be laggards for sure. They're not going to take risks. They to make sure that the population is not going to go through another wave of this. So, but they're also going to risk, by doing that, of increasing the economic damage, not only to their state, which is terrible, but also to the country as a whole. So I hope that we have the capacity built for the healthcare to really overcome this stuff. All right, so just wrapping this up, as I said, the most likely outcome is going to be reopening of the economy on May 1st. I think that's what President Trump's going to go through. The coronavirus situation in the U.S. economy is going to look vastly different over the next 3 months, for sure. The darkest time is right now, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, as these infections and deaths peak. The U.S. economy will also be experiencing the worst part of this, as this self-induced depression occurs. And I'll tell you, that's strongly supported by the economic data. And that's why I also think we're going to try to get the economy going as fast as possible. Keep this in mind. Rapid progress is being made on multiple fronts to reduce the peak of the infections and to enable the healthcare system to build the capacity that can better handle the caseload. Rapid progress is being made to generate critical supplies, as I mentioned, and reduce the infections and save lives. And rapid progress is also being made to discover medications and potentially immunizations, but that's down the road, that can also reduce the mortality rate of COVID-19. All of this is going to speed the reopening of the US economy before the virus really fully runs its course. All right, that's a lot, but I think that can help you in solving the puzzle and really probably get you outside sooner rather than later, and hopefully get you back to work sooner rather than later with the risks that are out there and changes to how we operate. Okay, I'm Andy Busch, economist, keynote speaker, former chief market intelligence officer for the US government. Hey, if you like these videos, just click subscribe and you can get them delivered to your inbox. Also, please go to andrewbusch.com. There's a lot more research there, a lot of stuff on politics, but also a ton of stuff on the virus and its impact. Thanks for watching, and let's pray that this thing gets over sooner rather than later.